during the month of Cheshvan. So this month itself has what we consider to be the Jewish Mother's Day. And there are a couple reasons for that. One being in regards to gematria, and the second reason being in relation to our mother, our forebear, Rachel. So I want to talk about the gematria first because that's a little tidbit of information, and then I'm going to talk about Rachel and the importance of her death, which happened during the month of Cheshvan. So in terms of gematria, we have, well, this actually ties in with Rachel too, so I'll just go ahead and mention that. So Rachel's Yahrzeit, the anniversary of her death, is on the 11th of Cheshvan. And we know that not because Torah or anywhere tells us specifically the date of her death, but we know that she died giving birth to her youngest son, Benjamin. And we know from study that he is said to have been born on the 11th of Cheshvan. So if he was born on that day and she died giving birth to him, we can pretty much say that she died on that day. I mean, it's possible that, you know, she died in the wee hours of Cheshvan 10, and then after her spirit had left her body that the child came out on the 11th, but that's probably not the case. It's more than likely that if he was born on the 11th, that she died on the 11th as well. So we're going to go with her date of death as being on the 11th of Cheshvan. Okay, and so in terms of the gematria, Cheshvan 11 is the 41st day from the start of the year. If we count the start of the year as on the civil calendar, not the ecclesiastical, because as we know, the ecclesiastical calendar starts in the spring with Nisan, but the civil calendar starts with Tishrei. So if we're going by the start of the year being Tishrei 1 up until Cheshvan 11 is 41 days. So if we look at the number 41, the value of the word mother, the Hebrew word mother, im, E-I-M, is, you know, the transliterated spelling of that word. The gematria, the numerical value of the word mother, is 41. And we're going to talk in a minute with the story of Rachel about borders and borders for her children. The word border in Hebrew also has a value of 41. So with this number thing going on with gematria, and with the story I'm going to tell you in a moment about Rachel, we see that the 11th of Cheshvan, which actually the day we're having this class and I'm recording it is actually the 11th of Cheshvan. So I have a Yahrzeit candle burning at home, but that's neither here nor there. I just think it's kind of telling that we're having this class where we're talking about Rachel and her Yahrzeit on the actual day of it. So that's special for me, you know, with having this class on that day. But anyway, because of her and what we're going to talk about in a few minutes in relation to her, we see that the 11th of Cheshvan is the Jewish Mother's Day, and it is the day for reclaiming our Jewish heritage, because the Jewish mother is the teacher of our culture and heritage and how it's traditionally passed along. Not always, sometimes, and I'm not even going into Jewish lineage being matrilineal. That's not something that I'm going to say that you're not Jewish if you don't have descent from mother, whatever. That's not my thing. But as far as teaching children, raising up the next generation, or whatever, traditionally that's done through the mother, although we know not always. But anyway, so that is where we see that the 11th of Cheshvan is the Jewish Mother's Day and why it's a special day. So some other things about Rachel before I get into the story. Her name means little sheep, which is very neat because she was a shepherdess, watching over her father's flocks. And we are told in the Torah that that she was very beautiful in form and in her face. I mean, everything about her was considered very beautiful. And this corresponds to the beauty of nature that we see in the outside world. If we go out in nature, it's considered very beautiful, and Rachel's beauty mirrors the beauty of nature. As compared to her sister Leah, who was dark and weak-eyed, had weak features, which corresponds to the darker, grimmer fate that her sister lived out. Not that Leah was not loved, not that Leah was not important, but the life path, being married even to the same man, raising their children together, living their entire lives together, they had different fates as far as their offspring were concerned, about the number of children they had, one being favored more by their husband, one being used as a pawn by their father in marriage. So we see that Leah had a darker and grimmer prospect in her life, which is lived out in the features of her physical appearance, and Rachel had a brighter, more nature corresponding life path before her, and her features mirrored that in being beautiful and, you know, reflecting the beauty of the natural world. We also see that in Rachel's death in childbirth mirrors the death of some plants, because we know that some plants die as they release their seeds. And so Rachel dying in childbirth, giving birth to Benjamin, is corresponding to that death of the plant releasing the seed. So we see through every aspect of her life that she represents nature and the outside world, which I think is pretty neat. So now I want to tell you a story about why Rachel's Yahrzeit is more important to us than that of any of our other matriarchs and patriarchs, because, you know, we have several, but the only one that you're likely to see a lot about if you research it is Rachel. Why is that? What made her so special? What made her death so important? So if we think about the fact that she died in childbirth and that led to her burial, where was Rachel buried? She was buried on the side of the road on the way to Bethlehem. And now it's probably considered within Bethlehem because they were so close to the Bethlehem of the time. It was like a mile, maybe a mile and a half away when she was buried. So why was she buried on the side of the road? It wasn't muddy and rainy. It's just the beginning of the rainy half of the year at this point. So it's not like her body could have been taken to Bethlehem to be buried. Okay, so maybe she couldn't have her body taken all the way to the cave of Machpelah, where the matriarchs and patriarchs are buried, where her sister is buried beside their husband. Why is Rachel buried alone? So not even in the cave necessarily, but why couldn't she have been buried, you know, in Bethlehem itself, where she wouldn't be all alone? Well, Midrash or story tells us that Rachel wanted to be buried alone on the side of the road. She gave herself a fate of being alone for eternity so that she could watch over her children. And what we see here is Rachel was a very compassionate person. When she met Jacob, they instantly fell in love, and he goes to her father Laban and agrees to work for 7 years for her, right? So Rachel's like, you know, my dad's gonna like try to cheat you, so, you know, whatever. And he's gonna try to substitute somebody else for me because he really doesn't want me to be marrying you, whatever. So they come up with a system of signs and symbols so that on the wedding night after the ceremony, when she's brought into the tent, she can, you know, give this sign and he'll know that it's her and he's not been swindled. So the time comes and all this, that, and the other, and Rachel sees that her sister Leah is being led to the tent, and she thinks, my sister doesn't have anything to do with this. And I love my sister, and I don't want her to be humiliated. And that's what's going to happen. She's going to go in there, and Jacob's going to humiliate her because she's not me and she doesn't have the sign. So Rachel, not knowing if she'll ever be able to marry Jacob, out of compassion and love for her sister, gives her sister these symbols and signs so that when she goes in the tent, she can share them and Jacob won't humiliate her. And of course, that's what happens. She goes in, Leah does, and they consummate the marriage, she and Jacob do, while Rachel's out there. Knowing that her sister is doing this, she basically gave up her claim on the love of her life to be compassionate to her sister. Now, we know the story that Jacob then goes to Laban, agrees to work 7 more years in exchange to marry Leah. But by this, or to marry Rachel. But by this point, Rachel's the second wife. She's not the real wife. I mean, she's his wife, but, you know, she's not number one. So she had sacrificed that. And she did the same thing in death. And so she does this because she's seeing God showing her that 1,000 years in the future, the Israelites, the Hebrews, are going to be sent in exile. And Rachel wants to be there to comfort her children as they're going into exile. And so that's why she gives up for her children, not for herself. She does it for her children. And not just her children, because we know she was the mother of 2 of Jacob's children. And then her maid, her sister's maid, each gave birth to 2. And then her sister had all these others. So Rachel felt like the mother of all of them, even though she was biologically only the mother of 2 of them. She loved them all. And so she's giving her entirety of eternity to be able to comfort her children 1,000 years from then. So she's buried on the side of the road alone. And then lo and behold, 1,000 years later, the Israelites are sent into exile. And when they go into exile, where do they go? They have to walk right by Rachel's grave on the side of the road, and they stop and they weep and they plead to Rachel to intercede on their behalf, and she does. And then we get to a story that is in Midrash that I really love, and I want to just read this story to you. So when the temple was destroyed and the Jews were being led into exile, Abraham came before God and said, "Master of the universe, when I was 100 years old, you gave me a son. And when he was 37 years old, you told me, raise him as a sacrifice before me. And I was able to overcome my natural mercy and even tied him down myself. Will you not remember my devotion and have mercy on my children?" And God said, "It is not enough." Next, Isaac came and said, "When my father said, 'God will show us the sheep for a sacrifice,' my son, I did not hesitate and accepted my fate and even extended my neck to be slaughtered. Will you not remember my strength and have mercy on my children?" And God said, "It is not enough." Next came Jacob and said, "I worked for 20 years in the house of Laban, and when I left, Esau came to harm me, and I suffered all my life raising my children. Now they are being led like sheep to the slaughter in the hands of their enemies. Won't you remember all my pain and suffering and redeem my children?" And God said, "It is not enough." Next came Moses and said, "Wasn't I a loyal shepherd for Israel for 40 years? And I ran before them in the desert like a horse. And when the time came to enter Israel, you decreed that I would die in the desert, and now they go into exile. Won't you listen to me crying over them?" And God said, "It is not enough." At that point, Rachel, our matriarch, came before God and said, "Master of the universe, you know that Jacob loved me most and worked for my father for 7 years in order to wed me. And when the time of my marriage came, my father switched my sister for me, and I didn't begrudge my sister, and I didn't let her be shamed. If I, who am only human, was not willing to humiliate my sister to get what I wanted, how could you, the eternal, living, compassionate God, cause my children to be exiled?" And immediately God's mercy was awakened, and he said, "For you, Rachel, I will bring Israel back to its place, as it is said, 'Do not cry and let your eyes not tear, for there is reward for your actions, and there is hope for your end, and your children will return to their borders.'" So we see that Rachel was a great mother. She was selfless. She was compassionate. Not only did she give up her earthly, worldly happiness in order to keep her sister from being humiliated, she also gave up her eternity by her husband's side and with her family to be alone on the side of the road out of compassion and kindness for her children 1,000 years into the future. So she was a very compassionate woman, and that's what makes her special and why we remember the anniversary of her death every year on the 11th of Cheshvan. So if you're the type of person that puts up a memorial candle, a Yahrzeit candle, you may want to consider adding Rachel to the list of people that you light a candle for each year. I mentioned already that I have one at home because it is the 11th of Cheshvan today as I'm recording this. So I do have one burning at my house right now. So yeah, that may be something you want to consider doing.